One black man, a knock at the door turned into something far darker. Two strangers, dressed like police, claimed to be from the HOA, demanding answers, threatening arrest. Imagine that, in your own home, where you should feel safest, suddenly treated like a criminal just because of the color of your skin. Fear gripped him, but what they didn't know was that behind that door stood someone they never expected. What happens when intimidation meets the wrong house? And the wrong man? Hit subscribe to join our community. Before the chaos unfolded, life for Marcus seemed steady, almost ordinary. He was a father, a neighbor, a man who had worked hard to build a sense of peace in his community. To his friends, he was the quiet type, always respectful, always willing to help. He spent his weekends tending the yard, waving at neighbors, and keeping to himself. On the surface, there was nothing unusual about his life, nothing that would draw unwanted attention. But beneath that calm exterior, Marcus carried years of quiet strength. He had lived through moments when his character was doubted simply because of his skin color. He had learned to carry himself with calm dignity, no matter how unfair the stares or subtle insults. His home was his sanctuary, the one place where he believed safety was guaranteed. That illusion was about to be shattered. On a seemingly uneventful afternoon, the sound of heavy knocks broke through the silence of his house. The kind of knock that doesn't ask, it demands. Something in his gut told him this wasn't normal. He froze for a moment, torn between disbelief and a rising fear that this wasn't just a routine misunderstanding. What Marcus couldn't know was that this knock would open the door to something far bigger, an encounter fueled by prejudice, power, and a mistake his uninvited visitors would soon regret. The pounding on Marcus's front door grew louder, more aggressive, echoing through the walls like a warning. When he finally opened it, two men stood on the porch, dressed in makeshift uniforms that mimicked authority, badges clipped to their belts, radios on their shoulders. Their tone was sharp, commanding. "We're here on behalf of the HOA. You need to come with us," one barked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Marcus's chest tightened. "Huh? Arrest?" None of this made sense. His dues were paid. His yard was immaculate. He had broken no rules. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal in his own home. It wasn't about grass length or parking violations. It was about him, his presence, his identity. The way they looked at him carried a message older than the uniforms they pretended to wear. "You don't belong here." He calmly asked for paperwork, for identification, for any shred of legitimacy. Instead, their voices grew louder. One stepped forward, trying to push past the doorway. The move was deliberate, an attempt to intimidate, to make him feel powerless. Marcus felt the familiar sting of anger. How many times had he seen this play out? The accusations without evidence, the assumption of guilt before innocence, the expectation that he should bow his head and comply, but he didn't step aside. He stood firm, his voice steady, refusing to be silenced. The tension grew unbearable. Neighbors peered through curtains, whispers rippled across the street. What they saw was a man surrounded, accused, and targeted with no crime committed. The imposters grew bolder, threatening legal consequences, even hinting at jail time. Their words dripped with arrogance, as if they were certain fear would do their job for them. For most people, it might have, but Marcus wasn't most people. Behind him, the floor creaked. Heavy footsteps approached from the hallway. The two men stiffened, unaware of what was coming next, because Marcus wasn't alone in that house. And the man who stepped forward wasn't just a bystander, he was someone trained to face intimidation head-on. The two fake officers smirked, certain they had cornered their target. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Marcus's son stepped into the room. His presence was calm yet commanding, the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to be announced. He locked eyes with the men, scanning their uniforms, their badges, details they thought no one would question. "Funny," he said evenly, his voice carrying weight. "Those badges you're wearing, they're not real. And impersonating law enforcement, that's a federal crime." The imposters froze, caught off guard. Their arrogance began to crack. They had walked into this home thinking they could intimidate a black man into submission. What they hadn't realized was that his son wasn't just any bystander, he was a trained FBI agent. The room tightened with silence. Neighbors who had gathered outside could now sense something extraordinary was happening. For years, they had seen prejudice go unchecked. But this time, the balance of power was shifting. The so-called officers tried to backpedal, stuttering excuses about HOA rules and routine enforcement. But the FBI agent didn't flinch. His voice was sharp, undeniable, cutting through their lies. "Drop the act," he ordered. "Every word you've said is intimidation. Every threat you've made is illegal. And right now, you're standing in front of federal jurisdiction." For the first time, fear flashed across their faces. The men who came to humiliate and control were now the ones exposed. The hunter had become the hunted. And in that charged moment, as the truth hung in the air, Marcus realized something deeper. This wasn't just about his house or his dignity. This was about generations of men like him who had been forced to endure, to survive, to remain silent. But silence had finally met resistance. The next words would decide everything. The imposters, once loud and overconfident, now stood speechless, their false authority stripped away. With a few decisive words, the FBI agent laid down their fate. Law enforcement was called, and this time the real police arrived, only to discover the truth. These men weren't officers, not even HOA representatives. They were agitators, hiding behind uniforms to disguise prejudice as power. For Marcus, it was more than a moment of vindication. It was a reminder of how fragile dignity can feel when prejudice walks up to your front door. Even inside his own home, the place meant to be his safest refuge, racism had found a way to knock. Yet this time, the ending was different. Strength answered fear. Truth stood against intimidation. And the message was clear. Silence is not the only option, but the story doesn't end here. Because for every Marcus who has someone to stand beside him, there are countless others who face these moments alone. They don't always have an FBI agent's son to step forward. They don't always have neighbors watching. And far too often their stories go unheard. That's why this story matters. It's not just about one black man, one house, or one confrontation. It's about the deeper truth. That racism hides in many faces, sometimes even pretending to be authority. And it thrives when people look away. So ask yourself, if intimidation knocked at your door, would you stand silent? Or would you stand strong? If this story touched you, don't just watch. Be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.